There's a thought you've replayed so many times that you could probably recite it word for word. Maybe it's something someone said to you, maybe it's a decision that you wish you acted on but were too afraid to make, or maybe it's something you said that you wish you could take back. Whatever it is, it keeps coming back. Usually these ruminating thoughts occur when you're alone, when the room's quiet and there's nothing else to fill the space. And every time it comes back, it doesn't just feel like a thought, it feels like a wound that keeps reopening. That's what I'm going to cover today, because how to stop ruminating is one of those questions that sounds simple until you're actually in it. And then nothing anyone says seems to help. It's easy to say, let it go, move on, or just stop thinking about it. But the reality is, it can be incredibly hard to do so. And there's a very specific reason for that, which I'll get into in a moment. But first, I want to say something clearly. If you're someone who replays the past a lot, there's nothing wrong with you. And I mean that not as a throwaway reassurance, but as a factual statement about how your brain actually works. Once you understand the mechanism behind it, you can give yourself some real relief, because your brain is doing something it genuinely believes is protecting you. And that's a big reason why rumination happens in the first place. When you're not actively focused on something like doing work, and you're not on your phone and just lying down at the end of the day, your brain doesn't go quiet. It switches to a different program. Researchers call this the default mode network, or DMN for short. Think of it as your brain's background process, and one of its primary jobs is to review the past and run simulations about the future. In the past, this made a lot of sense for survival. Our ancestors needed to process what went wrong, rehearse better responses, and avoid repeating dangerous situations. So the DMN was a feature, not a bug. But the environment we're operating in today is very different from the one that our DMN was designed for. And your brain is trying to protect you from a threat that is, in most cases, something that's already passed. Here's where it gets more specific. There's a process called amygdala tagging. When something happens that carries emotional significance, things like shame, embarrassment, rejection, failure, or an unforeseen betrayal, your amygdala flags it. It essentially marks that memory with extra intensity so your brain prioritizes it. The goal is simple. Pay attention to this so you don't get hurt the same way again. So your brain is not replaying that conversation to torture you. It's actually trying to protect you from repeating that same negative experience by adding an emotional charge to it. The problem is that the more intense the emotion, the louder the tag. And the louder the tag, the more persistently the brain returns to it. So the irony is, the experiences that have hurt you the most are also the ones your brain is most committed to reviewing. That's just how it's wired. But here's the part that genuinely surprised me when I first understood this. And I think it'll reframe how you see the whole loop in general. There is a psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik Effect. It was first observed by a Soviet psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik in the 1920s. And the basic idea is this: your brain is significantly better at remembering unfinished tasks than completed ones. Think of it like an open tab on your browser. Once you close the tab, your brain can clear the memory. But if the tab is still open, your brain keeps it active and keeps returning to it because it hasn't been resolved. The Zeigarnik effect is why you can remember every detail of a project you haven't finished, yet you barely recall the ones you have completed. Now apply that to your emotional experiences. When something happens that leaves you without closure, like a relationship that ended ambiguously, a conversation that never got resolved, A moment where you said the wrong thing but never got to explain yourself. Or a failure where no one ever told you it was okay. Then in all these cases, your brain keeps that tab open and keeps returning to it. Not to hurt you, but because it's biologically wired to seek resolution for unfinished business. And here's the problem. Some experiences can't give you the kind of closure that your brain is looking for. Maybe because this type of closure would need to come from outside of you, like from an apology that never came, a conversation that won't likely ever happen, an outcome that can't be undone. Your brain keeps looping because it's waiting for an ending that isn't coming. So the question isn't, how do I force my brain to drop this? The question is, how do I give it the kind of resolution it can actually work with? And I'll come back to that. But first, let me explain why emotionally charged experiences are harder to release than anything else. Because I think many of us don't fully grasp this part. Here's the thing about emotionally charged memories. They don't behave the same way as neutral ones. When you recall a regular memory, it's relatively stable and you just remember the information. But when you recall a memory that's attached to a strong emotion, something different happens. The emotion gets re-experienced, not just remembered. It's like opening a file that's still running in the background, which stays live and active every time you go back to it. Research on memory reconsolidation helps explain why this matters. Every time you recall a memory, your brain briefly opens it for updating before storing it again. That's actually useful information because it means memories aren't fixed, but it also means that every time you return to a painful memory without any new context or meaning attached to it, you're essentially re-experiencing and resaving the same wound with the same emotional charge. And I don't just mean that theoretically, but practically. Every loop you run without a new lens is a vote to keep that wound active. Replaying the memory over and over without any shift in meaning doesn't bring you closer to closure. It just reinforces the emotional intensity of those memories. What makes it harder is that this doesn't feel like a loop when you're in it. It feels like processing, like you're working through something, like if you just think about it enough, you'll get somewhere. But the signal that tells you you're actually processing versus just replaying, that's something we'll get into in a moment. By the way, if you enjoy topics like this, I send out a free weekly mindset newsletter. Each week, I unpack the neuroscience and psychology behind patterns like overthinking, people-pleasing, emotional intelligence, and identity shifting. I essentially translate these ideas into simple mental frameworks so you can apply them into your daily life. If this sounds interesting, you can join using the link in the description below. Now, there's something I want to help you reframe in your mind because I think it matters. Most people think of rumination as a mental inconvenience, like background noise that's super annoying, but not really costing them anything. But here's what I've realized. Rumination is not just a thought pattern, it's a resource pattern. Every loop you run in your head is literally costing you something, and the currency it spends is your time, your attention, and your energy. Oh, and don't forget your sense of peace. Think of it like this. You wake up every day with a certain amount of mental bandwidth, which means it is not unlimited. Your ability to focus, to be present in a conversation, to make a clear decision, or to feel genuinely at ease, all of that comes from the same resource pool. And rumination draws from that pool in small, persistent, almost invisible ways throughout your day. Let's say you're in a meeting and you're physically present, but part of your brain is still replaying that argument from last week. Maybe you're having dinner with someone you love, but You're only half there because an unwanted memory from 3 months ago just resurfaced. Or maybe you're just trying to fall asleep, but the loop in your mind is open so your nervous system stays alert. And in all of these scenarios, I don't just mean in theory, but practically, the moments you miss because you're spending your attention somewhere else, the relationships that suffer because you're not fully in them, and the decisions that take longer because your mental energy is already depleted. So the question isn't just how do I stop thinking these thoughts, but rather what would I actually do with that time and attention and energy if it wasn't being spent mentally rehearsing unhelpful thoughts that aren't moving me forward? I remember a period of time where I was carrying a situation in my head that I couldn't really let go of. The short version is this. I was in a professional situation where I felt like I'd been screwed over by someone that I trusted and thought was a good person. So when I fully grasped what had actually happened, I felt a mix of emotions. The words that come to mind are betrayed, surprised, deceived, and definitely unethical. This experience created a lot of confusion and injustice in my mind. Did I miss the signs? Why did I trust that? What does this say about my judgment? These are the questions. And for months, that loop kept running, not every minute of every day, but consistently enough that it was always there underneath the surface. I would be in the middle of doing something, and these negative thoughts and emotions would boil up. It felt like I was just reviewing the same footage over and over, hoping I would find something that would change the outcome. What I didn't understand at the time that I understand now is that I was stuck in a Zeigarnik loop. My brain had an open tab and it was going back to it consistently because it hadn't found resolution. And the reason my mind couldn't find resolution was because I was framing the whole experience as something that had been done to me, which meant that the resolution could only come from somewhere outside of me. The mindset shift that actually helped me was not to try and force myself to stop thinking about it. It was changing what I was looking for when I thought about it. Basically moving from what went wrong and who was at fault to what did this experience genuinely teach me that I actually needed to learn from it. So even though this reframe didn't change my stance on what actually happened, because objectively speaking, I believe the actions were unethical and lacked integrity. But the reframe did help me because it helped me to close the loop by turning it into an insightful lesson I could apply for the future. And when the loop closed, my brain stopped returning to these thoughts. On the topic of reframing, I think it's important to clarify that reframing is not denial or the unwillingness to acknowledge the objective reality of a situation. It also isn't about artificially forcing positivity in a way where you tell yourself what hurt you actually did not. That would be suppression, and suppression keeps the loop alive because the emotion is still there, even if it's just buried underneath the surface. Reframing is your ability to extract the lessons from an experience instead of just sitting inside of it. This is the difference between you viewing something as happening to you versus for you. When you make this shift, you start seeing what you can learn from an experience in a way that can genuinely help you to grow. So let me walk you through 5 real life experiences and situations where people often get stuck and what this shift actually looks like. The first is failure. This mental script sounds like I failed because I'm not capable enough. The extracted lesson would be to turn this into I attempted something and it didn't work out, but now I know how to improve it for my next attempt. When you reframe failure as feedback, then your mind begins to learn to ask different and more productive questions. The second is betrayal. This loop sounds like someone I trusted hurt me, and now I don't know who I can trust anymore. The extracted lesson would reframe this into this experience revealed something about how I extend trust. So now I can pay closer attention to these signals if they show up again. The thing is, betrayal stings the hardest when you feel like you should have seen it coming. But the pain of it is actually telling you something about your own discernment that you can build on for the future. The third is a mistake. This mental script sounds like I made the wrong call and now I can't take it back. The extracted lesson would turn this into I responded from a version of me that existed in that moment, but now I know what a more grounded response looks like. When you treat mistakes as a final verdict on who you are, this creates rumination because it doesn't make room for you to evolve as a person. But when you take and treat this mistake as a draft, your mind starts informing you of what the next version of you can do instead. The fourth is a missed opportunity. This loop sounds like I didn't take the chance when I had it, and now it's gone ... forever. The extracted lesson would turn this into why was I afraid to take the leap back then, and is that same fear still showing up and holding me back right now? By seeing a missed opportunity as a window into your self-limiting beliefs, your mind stops grieving what didn't happen and starts asking what's still in the way going forward. And the fifth is rejection. This mental script sounds like I wasn't chosen and this means I'm not good enough. The extracted lesson would be to turn this into this experience showed me something about where I am better fit and what I actually need so I can move forward in a direction that's more aligned. When you reframe rejection as redirection, your mind stops collecting evidence of your inadequacy and starts pointing you toward a better fit. So the mental model is this. The brain keeps the tab open because it's waiting for resolution, and you give it resolution by extracting the meaning rather than trying to force yourself to forget. When your experience stops being a failure and starts being a teacher, you give your brain something real to work with so it can close the loop. From a neuroscience perspective, here's why this actually works. Remember memory reconsolidation? The idea that every time you recall a memory, your brain briefly opens it for updating. That's the window when you return to a painful memory with a new lens and new meaning attached. You're not just thinking differently about it, you're updating how this memory is stored and literally editing the emotional charge of the file associated with it. So you don't have to keep the original version of a story because every time you recall it, your brain opens it for editing. But here's the challenge. And this is something I think gets missed in a lot of conversations about rumination. All of this work, the reframing, the lesson of extraction, the meaning making, none of it can happen if you're not even aware when you're in a loop. Because when you're inside the rumination cycle, you can't process or access the part of your brain that does clear and objective thinking. Your prefrontal cortex, which handles rational thinking, decision-making, and impulse control, is being overridden by the emotional intensity of the replay. You can't think your way out of a dysregulated state. So the question isn't, how do I immediately reframe this painful memory? The question is, how do I first notice that I'm in the loop so I can create enough space to actually work with it? And this sounds obvious, but most people don't catch it in real time. They're in the loop for minutes, sometimes hours, before they realize where their mind has been. And by then, the emotional charge has already built up to a point that they are caught in their feelings instead of rational thinking. There are 3 signals I've learned to recognize in myself. The first is physical. A tightness in the chest, a tension in the jaw, or Shoulders, a kind of low-level agitation that doesn't have a clear source. Your body knows when you're in a loop before your mind does. The second is temporal, where you realize you're thinking about the same thing across multiple moments in the day, and it keeps surfacing even when you're not deliberately returning it to it. And the third is the quality of the thought itself. You notice you're not asking new questions and you're just landing on the same blurry conclusions that pull you further into frustration and mental replay. When you catch one of these signals, this moment of awareness is the intervention, not a resolution, just a pause and a simple acknowledgement that I'm in the loop right now. Carl Jung wrote something that I think a lot about in this context. He said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Rumination, when it runs below your level of awareness, feels like the weather, like something that just happens to you, like a mood you woke up in. But the moment you see it, it becomes something you can work with. You can gently redirect your attention, ask what lessons can be extracted, and simply let your awareness interrupt the loop so you can choose your next thought. That space between stepping outside to notice the loop and just continuing to live in it is where your actual agency lives. And this is the thing I keep coming back to in my own life. Your mind, if left unattended, will drift to wherever the pull is strongest. And for a lot of us, the pull is towards something that's unresolved, like negative experiences that still carry emotional weight. Your mind will go there on its own, and the question is whether you're aware of it enough to notice and then deliberately choose your next thought and action. So I want to leave you with this. Think about the one thing you ruminate about the most, that loop that just keeps showing up. Now ask yourself this question, and I want you to be brutally honest with yourself as possible. What is this experience trying to teach me that I haven't fully received yet? When you can extract and write down this lesson, you stop letting negative experiences from your past live rent-free in your head. Because the goal here isn't to forget or to pretend these experiences didn't happen, but to ultimately transform these negatives into positives in a way that ultimately gives you back your time, energy, and attention for what is in front of you. So thanks so much for watching. My name is Dexter, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.